Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. The New English translation uses the word futility. Futile, futile, laments the teacher. Absolutely futile. Everything is futile. The New International Version uses the word meaningless. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Vanity, if you're really old. Futility, meaninglessness. Is this what the Creator, is that why He made this cosmos and gave us life? The problem we know is not what Jehovah did in His creation. Genesis, at the beginning, Genesis 1 verse 31, after that all the things have been created, God looked at everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good, right? Very good. It was created by God, and therefore incredible. So when the preacher says that everything is vanity and futile and meaningless, he's not talking about the physical world. Yet too often, a lot of times when we read the word world in the Bible, we still primarily think of that. And we need to be careful about falling into that misconception. What's the source of the problem? Why is it that everything is vanity, futile, and meaningless? And I know you couldn't see what Earl was doing, but he was pointing to himself. Not because he alone is, he's not that old, but because each of us, it's us, we're the problem. And it's really about us striving to live without God. And that's much of what the book of Ecclesiastes is really about. What is the meaning of life if there is no God? And the preacher in that book sought meaning in a variety of different aspects of life. He sought it in wisdom. He sought it in pleasure. And understand, when I say pleasure, it wasn't all sinful things. It was just in things that were pleasurable. He sought it even in work. He tried to understand why things happen the way they do. Why is there wickedness and oppression and death? What about the values of wealth and honor and how important those things are? And his conclusion at the beginning of the book is vanity, futility, meaningless. But that's not how he ends the book. Because the book isn't just about what it's like without God, but reminds us of how important it is to follow after Him. So in Ecclesiastes 12, verse 1, as the preacher is ending, he says, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them." Remember your Creator. There's going to be a time when life is not as pleasurable and enjoyable as it once was. He's not saying, again, the pleasure is sinful. He's just saying life won't be the same. Remember your Creator. And then at the end, in verse 13, he says, the end of the matter, all has been heard. He's tried it all. What's the conclusion? Fear God. And really, that's the same as saying, remember the Creator. Right? Fear God, remember the Creator. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man. Everything about what we are is about us and our relationship with the one who created us. That's what it's about. So when we get to the New Testament, if you look at Matthew the 7th chapter, verses 11 through 14, verses 13 and 14, where Jesus is going through the the Sermon on the Mount, and he's drawing it to a close. And he tells the people at that time who've listened to his message, you should enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way that is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. He presents classically in this passage, there are only two paths. And in those two paths, there are very clear destinations. One is destruction and one is life. This is not the only time that he does this. If you look at Mark, the 8th chapter, verses 36 and 37, he asks, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? You have a choice. You can forfeit your soul or you can save your soul. In John, the 8th chapter, in verse 23, he made this distinction about himself as he was being questioned about his teachings. He says to the people who were questioning him, you are from below, I'm from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world. And again, just remember, he's not talking about the physical world, is he? You are of this world. He's talking about the vanity, the futility, the meaninglessness of life without God. And Jesus says, I'm not of that world. I'm not of this world at all. And James reminds us, in James chapter 4, verse 4, you adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Again, not the physical world, the world we live in. Repeatedly, Jehovah tells us in a variety of ways and places, there's only two ways that we can follow. One path is from below. It leads to destruction. It leads to the loss of our souls, and we become enemies of God. We call this path the world. The other path is the one that's from above, and it leads to life. And it leads to the saving of our souls. And although it doesn't say it explicitly in James, the implication is that we have friendship with God. And that's a beautiful thing. So we have these two things that we need to understand. What does Jehovah say about the world that we've just defined? What does he have to say about it? We're going to start in 1 John, the 5th chapter, and in verse 19, where John says, we know that we are from God, and the whole world is in the power of the evil one. The whole world is in the power of the evil one. Look at the conditions that exist. Sometimes we think that the evil that's happening in the world is just because of us, that we're just humans. But there's a pervasive influence that keeps us captive, that traps us, that makes us think that it's normal, and we follow after it. When we think back to the Garden of Eden, it entered as early as that. And there we see Satan influencing Eve to think differently, don't we? What is he trying to get her to think about? Has God said this? Well, consider that. Think differently about God. Question him. Has he told you not to do this? Look what it can get you. He taught her discontentment. In the Garden of Eden, Satan got Eve to be discontent with all the blessings. I want more. I think there's more than what God has given me. That's the world kind of thinking. And it lies under the power, the influence of the evil one. Psalm 17 tells us something about how we fall into the trap of this way of thinking. In Psalm 17, let me get there real quick. or maybe not so quick. Psalm 17, we're looking at verses 13 and 14. Arise, O Jehovah, confront him, subdue him, deliver my soul from the wicked by your sword, from the men by your hand, O Jehovah, from men of this world. From men of this world. Now listen to how he defines that. Men of this world whose portion is in this life. Let me check real quick. Yes, David said in this. David's son is going to be the one that figures out that if your portion of life is in this world, it is vanity, futility, meaningless. The men of this world have made everything about this life. Do you see what the focus is on? The treasure. Oh, we didn't read it. Verse 14 continuing. You fill their womb with treasure, they are satisfied with children, and they leave their abundance to their infants. Treasure the children, treasure the abundance that they gather during life, and that abundance goes to their children, and that's life. And maybe you recall that that's actually one of the things Solomon talked about, that you spend all your life toiling and working, and you gather up all those things, and then when you die, all of it goes to someone else. And who knows if that person's going to use all that wealth in a wise way. And the implication, I think, that Solomon's making is they don't. Solomon's conclusion about if this is the portion of your life, vanity, futility, and meaninglessness. We're familiar with 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. It's one of the passages that we quote a lot about this, and again, just that constant reminder I want to give you. When he's talking about the world, he's not talking about the physical world. Do not love this world or the things in this world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Again, John is really good at that either-or situation, isn't he? You either love God or you hate God. If you love the world, you can't love the Father. Verse 16 continues, for all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. How many of you, when we just read that part, the world is passing away, thought, oh, that's talking about the end of the destruction of the physical world? He's not talking about that, right? There's a hope in this passage that's incredible with that statement. And that is, as God is looking at the world, he sees an end to that way of thinking. All that's of the world. Don't love it. Because we think we can have both. We think we can love the world. We can live as if our lives are just all about what I want and what I desire and what I like. And I think I can love the Father. And John says that's completely incompatible. It doesn't work that way. Because those desires of the flesh and the eyes and the pride of life, they don't come from God, they come from the world. Again, it reminds us of Eve so powerfully, of what she did. Isn't it interesting in this passage that John kept using the expression Father? He wasn't just talking about God as if God was just out there or someone. He's talking about a relationship. He wasn't just talking about someone who makes rules and waits for us to break them. He was talking about someone who loves us as his children. So really, that's why you can't love the world and have the love of the Father. Ephesians 2. Jehovah says this also. Ephesians 2, we're going to read verses 1 and 2. And you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. So he describes us, and this is before we're saved, when we're still in sin, we're dead in our trespasses and sin. And the defining part of that is that we followed the course of the world. The one that's under the influence of the evil one that he talked about, the one where we see men who are around us who live their life that way, that makes it feel like it's normal. We follow that, even though we understand that Satan's behind it. And Paul in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, told the saints there, do not be conformed to this world. Don't try to blend in with that. Don't be conformed to it. One last passage from Jesus, John 12, verse 31. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. I think that's what John was talking about in 1 John 5, don't you? That all the things for this judgment, and we already know what that judgment is, don't we? He's told us it's about a path that leads to destruction and the loss of your soul and enmity with God. And the ruler of these things is going to be cast out. So why would you follow that, knowing that this is the judgment that's coming against the world? So the question what we need to ask is, how can we overcome the world? If it's so pervasive and things are so bad, how can we get out of that? And I want to call your minds back to a passage that I've referred to a lot in this series of lessons that we've done. In Galatians, the 6th chapter and verse 14, where he says, far be it from me to boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. There's the world. And what does Paul say about his relationship? The world has been crucified. It's put to death, right? And I've been crucified to the world. I'm dead to the world is dead to me. Boy, those are such easy words to say and think that's exactly how I want it to be, but it's really difficult when it comes down to living in that way and the struggle. And that's because of how pervasive the influence of Satan and the world around us, the people, it's just everywhere. We see it from the time that we're children. Everyone's encouraging us to live in a certain way. I want you to turn with me to 1 John 5. In 1 John 5, chapter 5, verses 4 and 5. And this is what John says by the Spirit. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. I just got to stop at that, don't we? If you're going to overcome the world, what does John say? Where does it start? Born of God. Now, Paul had said, I'm crucified. And now, John is saying, you have to be born of God. How many of you guys have a very specific concept in your head right now about what that means, to die to something and to be born anew? It sounds a lot like baptism, in case your mind's not thinking like my mind. For everyone who's been born of God overcomes the world. How can you overcome the world? Be born of God. So, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is it that overcomes the world except the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? So, if we're going to overcome the world, be born of God. And what is our victory? Faith. And it sounds too simple, and yet I find it profound. There's a lot of things he doesn't say what our victory is. He doesn't say our victory is in perfect obedience, our own works by themselves. There's no victory in perfect obedience. Keep all the rules you want, but if you don't believe, there's no victory in overcoming the world. The Pharisees fell into this trap. The Pharisees fell into this trap and equated righteousness with perfect obedience. And then they made a bunch of rules around the rules of God, and they equated that with righteousness. And they did so, creating their own righteousness. And Jesus repeatedly pronounced woe on them. Sorrow. Not just you're wrong, but it's really sad what you've done because you think you're being saved. Works without faith is meaningless. He doesn't say we're saved by worshiping God. Offer sacrifices. Offer more and more. That's what Cain did. Cain offered his sacrifices, but his was not accepted. And Abel's was accepted because Abel did it through faith. Hebrews, the 11th chapter, tells us. Engage in all the rituals that you want. Okay, so we're not going to be the ones, killing cows. But we can talk all we want about going to church and giving and praying and reading our Bibles and singing. Nope, this is all futility unless you believe. There's no victory in just doing those things. It's faith. It's faith that makes our service, our goodness, our righteousness, our worship meaningful, both to God and to us. And through these, we have victory. And I just want to emphasize to you what a great contrast this is. You can go the way of the world, and Solomon said, vanity. And Jesus says, you can follow my way and have victory. For most of us, that's an easy choice, isn't it? Romans, the 8th chapter. Notice what Paul says in this passage. Romans chapter 8, verses 29 and 30. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that we might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, Verse 30. My mind is not all there. Verse 30. And those whom he predestined, he also called. Those whom he called, he also justified. Those whom he justified, he also glorified. So, if the world is crucified to us, and we're born of God, we're going to be conforming not to the world, but conforming to the image of Jesus. So we have to change the perspective. We have to change this way of thinking, because that's where the victory is overcome. And this conforming, interesting to me, and Paul makes it really clear in this passage, his focus is not on what I do, but what he did for me. He called. He justified. He glorified. So if there's a part of you that says, well, I can't be victorious because, and you can fill in the blank, because whatever you think it is. Just remember, it's not you, it's him. He wants you to look like him, and so he called you to that. And so he made you right with him. And so he glorified you. Notice that that's something that happened, not will happen one day, right? He called, he justified, you're a glorified being. There's victory. What is our victory? Faith. When we have faith in Christ, That's the promise there. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. And this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. So again, not only are we not conforming to the world, we're conforming to His image, and we are being transformed. I like that it's a process. That's part of what gives us hope, isn't it? Because of those times when we struggle, when we're pulled by the world away, we can know that we are being transformed. And notice he says, from one degree of glory to the next. He glorified us and He continues to glorify us, and we're getting better all the time. And where does this come from? Oh, I'm so good. No, this comes from the Lord. I mean, it couldn't be more plain in this passage where the victory is for us. It comes from the Lord, who's the Spirit. And so in Romans 12 and in verse 2, where it says, don't be conformed to this world, he says to do what? Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Don't be conformed, transformed. And what's great is, as you go into Romans, the 12th chapter, and you go into the last few verses of that, he gives us a beautiful picture of what really that looks like. Beginning in verse 9. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast what is good. By the way, as I'm reading this, pay attention to don't be conformed things that he says in this passage. Look at the things that you can't be a part of anymore. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. Excuse me. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And that last part of that is the summary for our lesson, isn't it? There is the world and there is God. One is vanity, one is victory. And as you look at this victory, what does he tell you you need to do? You can overcome evil by doing good. We overcome it by being born of God. We overcome it by our faith. And clearly, we have to make choices. Don't conform to the world. Don't choose the evil. Don't choose to avenge. Don't be haughty. And then the contrast is to be transformed. That means, in part, we have to look at the world and see how the world works and say, I'm not going to be like that. And stop making excuses for it when we are. Because we have victory. Love genuinely. Do good, brotherly affection, honor. Be zealous. Serve the Spirit. Hope, patience, prayer, contributing to the needs of the saints, showing hospitality, blessing, rejoicing and weeping, living in harmony, associating with those who are lowly, doing honorable things, living peaceably, feeding your enemy. How many times have how many times have you heard people say, I can't do that? then you're giving in to the way of living in the world. When you say, I can't do that, when God says, this is what you need to do, you're giving in to that sense of meaningless futility and vanity. Feed your enemy. Make him up a nice meal. Give it to him. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We are going to get one song on the board. We're going to sing one verse of this song because I think it captures the idea of what we're talking about. And I'm also going to take this off so you don't hear me singing much. The way of the cross leads home. And just listen to the words of this song. We should do all the verses, but we're just going to get started. But go back and look